With the bet officially dead, the dynamic between them shifted into something new and undefined. It wasn't a romance, and it wasn't the tense arrangement they'd had before. It was, for the first time, a friendship. The dates became less like fake dates and more like just time spent. They fell into an easy rhythm. One Saturday, Amelia surprised Brooke by taking her to a quiet, little-known wing of the Met, pointing out her favorite obscure 17th-century Dutch paintings. Brooke, in turn, showed her that the value of art wasn't always in its gilded frame, taking her on a street art tour. They discovered a shared, sarcastic sense of humor. They learned each other's coffee orders. Amelia found out Brooke was a surprisingly good cook, a skill she'd picked up in various places around the world. Brooke learned that Amelia had a shockingly nerdy passion for historical figures. They talked about everything and nothing. In Brooke's apartment, surrounded by maps and books, they shared stories about their travels, their childhood dreams, and their frustrations with the world. For Amelia, it was revelatory. These were conversations without an agenda, moments of connection without the pressure of performance. She was just Amelia, and Brooke seemed to actually like her. One rainy afternoon, they were huddled in a small coffee shop, soaked from a sudden downpour. They were laughing about a terrible open mic comedian they had just seen. As their laughter subsided, a comfortable silence settled between them. Amelia looked at Brooke, who was staring out the rain-streaked window, a thoughtful expression on her face. The light from the window caught the flecks of gold in her brown eyes. In that unguarded moment, a feeling bloomed in Amelia's chest. A warm, quiet, and profoundly dangerous feeling. It wasn't the idealized memory of her first love, nor was it the shallow attraction she'd felt for countless other women. This was different. It was quieter, deeper, rooted in friendship and genuine admiration. As if sensing the shift, Brooke turned her head and their eyes met. The laughter was gone, replaced by a sudden electric awareness. The space between them, once filled with arguments and negotiations, was now charged with a new, unspoken question. 3 seasons passed. The crisp autumn air that had followed their truce gave way to the biting cold of winter, which in turn softened into the tentative warmth of a New York spring. The space between Amelia and Brooke, once a battlefield of class and ideology, became a comfortable, lived-in home. Amelia's life was unrecognizable, even to herself. She sold the ostentatious sports car she rarely drove and started taking the subway almost exclusively. One afternoon, Charlotte visited her penthouse and found her not browsing online luxury shops, but reading a book on urban gardening, a small pot of struggling basil on her windowsill. "I don't know who you are anymore," Charlotte said, half joking, half in awe. "Me neither," Amelia replied with a smile. "Isn't it great?" Their friendship deepened into something essential, a quiet constant in the noise of the city. They weren't dating, not in the formal sense. They were just together. They cooked dinners in Brooke's tiny apartment and spent snowy Sundays in Amelia's vast living room, watching historical documentaries and arguing about the narration. The unspoken question that had hung between them in the coffee shop remained, a low, simmering heat beneath the surface of their friendship. They both felt it, but neither was willing to risk the precious, real thing they had built by naming it. Until one rainy April evening, they were curled up on opposite ends of Amelia's huge sofa, watching a documentary about a famously tragic queen. The film ended on a dramatic, somber note, the narrator's voice heavy with pathos. Amelia picked up the remote and muted the television, a thoughtful expression on her face. She turned to Brooke, who was still looking at the screen. "You know," Amelia said, her tone perfectly serious, "I think I have her all figured out." Brooke turned, raising an eyebrow. "Oh yeah?" Amelia sat up, mimicking the deadpan. slightly condescending posture Brooke had used in the dive bar all those months ago. She fixed Brooke with a cool, analytical gaze. "Well," Amelia said, her voice a perfect imitation of Brooke's cynical drawl. "She's established that she has a tragic backstory and that she objects to being publicly humiliated. Congratulations. That makes her human." For a second, Brooke just stared at her, her brain clearly processing the words. Then a look of shocked recognition flashed in her eyes, and she let out a sound Amelia had never heard before. A loud, sudden, unrestrained bark of laughter. It wasn't a smile or a chuckle. Brooke threw her head back and laughed, a genuine, joyful sound that filled the entire apartment. She laughed until tears pricked the corners of her eyes, not at the joke itself, but at the sheer, unarmored audacity of Amelia saying it. As her laughter subsided, she looked at Amelia, who was watching her with a wide, happy grin. The humor had washed away the last of the tension, the last of the walls between them, leaving only a profound, glowing affection. "You're a real piece of work, Hawthorne," Brooke said, her voice soft and still catching with laughter. "I learned from the best," Amelia replied. The space between them was no longer a question. It was an answer. Brooke leaned across the sofa, her smile softening into something else entirely. She cupped Amelia's cheek, her thumb gently stroking her skin. "You're real," Brooke whispered, more to herself than to Amelia. "This is real." Amelia's breath hitched. She leaned in, closing the final inch between them, and pressed her lips to Brooke's. The kiss was soft and sure, tasting of shared jokes and rainy nights, and a love that had grown quietly, stubbornly, in the most unlikely of circumstances. It wasn't a performance or a prize. It was just them. They were a couple. It was a simple fact, but it changed everything. The simmering tension was replaced by an easy, joyful intimacy. For 2 blissful months, they were inseparable, falling deeper in love with every shared joke and quiet moment. For the first time, Amelia felt like she was in a relationship with no armor and no ghosts. It was just them. One sunny afternoon, they were walking hand in hand through the West Village, debating where to get ice cream. It was a perfect, ordinary day. As they approached a crosswalk, a sleek black town car pulled up to the curb. A man in an impeccably tailored suit stepped out, his presence radiating a quiet, immense power. Amelia froze. She recognized him instantly from the covers of Forbes and Fortune. It was Alistair Vance, the legendary and reclusive CEO of Vance Industries, one of the most powerful men in the country. She had studied his business strategies, his ruthless acquisitions, his almost mythical reputation. She was about to point him out to Brooke, starstruck, when the man's stern face broke into a warm, familiar smile. He looked directly past Amelia. "Brooke, sweetheart," Alistair Vance said, his voice a rich baritone. "I was just on my way to a meeting. I didn't know you'd be in this part of town." Amelia's world tilted on its axis. She looked from the billionaire CEO to the woman holding her hand, the anti-corporate, anti-establishment backpacker who despised the world of the wealthy elite. The pieces clicked into place with a sickening finality. Brooke Haven, Alistair Vance. "Dad," Brooke said, her voice tight, all the easy warmth gone from her face. She dropped Amelia's hand as if it were on fire. "What are you doing here?" "Just a meeting at the firm," he said, his eyes flicking to Amelia with polite curiosity. "We were just leaving," Brooke said quickly, pulling Amelia by the arm. "I'll call you Sunday." "Of course, sweetheart," he said, before disappearing into a skyscraper. The moment he was gone, Amelia pulled her arm free. She felt numb, a cold dread spreading through her chest. She turned to face Brooke, who wouldn't meet her eyes. "Your dad?" Amelia's voice was a dead, flat thing. "Alistair Vance is your dad?" Amelia, I can explain. Explain what? Amelia's voice rose, shaking with a cold, rising fury. Explain that your entire identity, the one you judged me with, the one you built our entire relationship on, is a lie? The hypocrisy was staggering. Brooke, who had shamed her for her wealth. Brooke, who had despised her for her privilege. Brooke, who had made brutal honesty the absolute, non-negotiable law of their relationship. All those lectures, Amelia said, her voice dripping with a betrayal so profound it felt like a physical wound. About community, about authenticity, about how people like me were the problem. She took a step back, the woman in front of her suddenly a stranger. The person she had fallen in love with, the one who had taught her to shed her armor, was a performance. A lie. Rule 2, Brooke, Amelia said, her voice cracking. No lies. No performances. She let out a sharp, broken laugh. What do you call this? Amelia walked. She didn't know where she was going. She just moved, putting as much distance as possible between herself and the woman who was suddenly a stranger. The fury in her chest was a cold, hard diamond. It wasn't the hot, fleeting anger of a simple argument. It was the chilling, permanent anger of betrayal. Every memory of the past year felt tainted, retroactively poisoned by the lie. Brooke's lectures on authenticity, her disdain for the wealthy, her insistence on her world, it was all a performance. A meticulous, long-con performance by the richest girl in the room. Amelia had been so focused on shedding her own armor that she hadn't realized Brooke's was thicker, more elaborate, and far more deceptive than her own. She finally hailed a cab, the name of her building leaving a bitter taste in her mouth. As she stepped into her pristine, minimalist penthouse, the space felt less like a home and more like the cell of a gilded cage. It was the very thing Brooke had pretended to despise, the world she had judged Amelia for inhabiting. She ignored the barrage of texts and calls that started flooding her phone, all from Brooke. Instead, she called the one person who would understand the language of her anger. Madison, she said, her voice tight. You're not going to believe this. She explained everything, the reveal, the real name, the staggering hypocrisy of it all. Holy hell, Madison said after a long silence. So you're telling me you forfeited your grandmother's watch for the daughter of Alistair Vance? The irony was thick enough to cut with a knife. She played me, Amelia said, pacing her living room like a caged animal. The entire thing was a lie. Was it? Madison asked, her voice surprisingly gentle. Amelia, think about it. The girl who sorted potatoes with you, who argued with you about documentaries, who made you laugh. Was she a lie? Or was that the most real part? The question stopped Amelia cold. She didn't have an answer. Meanwhile, across the city, Brooke stood in her own apartment, the carefully curated space of a world traveler. The maps on the wall, the worn paperbacks, the lack of possessions. It had once been her sanctuary, her proof that she was different. Now it felt like the set of a play that had just ended. A lie. She had run from the Vance name her whole life. Haven was her mother's name, a woman who had wilted under the pressures of the corporate world and had always dreamed of a simpler life. After her death, Brooke had adopted the name as a shield and an identity, a way to live the life her mother never could. She'd traveled the world to find genuine connection, to prove that a person's worth had nothing to do with their net worth. And then she'd met Amelia. In Amelia, she had found a surprising, captivating partner in her rebellion. She had fallen in love with the woman Amelia was becoming, the one who was shedding her own armor. She had been so focused on Amelia's performance that she had ignored her own. She had demanded brutal honesty while harboring the biggest lie of all. She stared at her phone, at the unanswered calls and the desperate unread texts. She had run from her world only to find the one person she wanted, and now her own lie had destroyed it. 2 days of suffocating silence passed. Amelia ignored Brooke's calls, deleted her texts without reading them, and ordered takeout, a prisoner in her own penthouse. The anger hadn't faded. It had cooled into a heavy, painful clarity. The problem wasn't just that Brooke had lied. It was that she had made Amelia feel ashamed of a world that Brooke herself was the ultimate heir to. On the third night, the intercom buzzed. "Miss Hawthorne, there's a Miss Vance here to see you." The name sent a jolt through her. Vance. Brooke was done hiding. "Send her up," Amelia said, her voice cold. When she opened the door, Brooke was standing there. She wasn't dressed in her usual backpacker uniform. She wore simple, well-fitting dark jeans, a black cashmere sweater, and the same worn leather boots. It was a fusion of her two worlds, an identity that was neither a performance nor a costume. It was just her. She looked tired, her eyes shadowed with regret. "Thank you for seeing me," Brooke said quietly. Amelia didn't invite her in. She just stood there, her arms crossed, a silent, unbreachable wall. "Haven was my mother's name," Brooke began, her voice low and steady. "She hated my father's world. She felt trapped by it. She died when I was young, and I spent my whole life trying to be the person she would have wanted to be. Someone free, someone whose identity wasn't tied to a stock price." Amelia's expression didn't soften. "After I finished university, my dad let me go. I think he assumed I'd get it out of my system and come back ready to play the corporate game. But I went backpacking, alone. Southeast Asia, parts of South America, Eastern Europe, real places, not luxury resorts. And you know what I realized? The most fascinating people I met weren't the ones my dad used to parade around at dinner parties. Not the early Apple investors or the ones who compared vintage car collections like Pokemon cards. The most interesting people I met were the ones who came from nothing, who saw life as something magical even when they had nothing in their pockets. They shared food with strangers, told stories under mosquito nets, laughed without needing a reason. They didn't care who I was, only whether I showed up. And once I saw that, once I saw how much richness there was in living without money as a filter, I knew I couldn't go back and pretend I belonged in that other world. She took a small step forward. "I was a hypocrite. I judged you for being everything I was terrified of becoming. But then I got to know you, the real you, the woman who is fiercely loyal to her friends, who feels things so deeply she has to build walls to protect herself." A flicker of something, pain, memory, crossed Amelia's face. "I fell in love with you, Amelia," Brooke said, her voice cracking just slightly. "The real you. The you who doesn't let people in but did anyway. Who made me feel seen in a way I didn't think I'd ever get to feel." She swallowed hard, searching Amelia's eyes. "And I was a coward. I thought if you knew who I really was, you'd stop looking at me the way you did. That you'd put me in the same box as everyone else who's let you down. And I couldn't risk that. I couldn't risk losing you. Not when you're the only thing that's ever felt true." She looked Amelia in the eye, her own gaze filled with a painful, unvarnished honesty. "I broke the most important rule we had. And I am so, so sorry." The confession hung in the air between them, raw and complete. The anger was still there, a deep, painful bruise, but beneath it stirred a flicker of empathy. "I don't know what to do with this, Brooke," Amelia said, her voice barely a whisper. "I look at you, and I don't know who I'm seeing." She took a step back, her arms still crossed over her chest. The empathy was there, but it was being choked by one sharp, specific memory. "When we were standing on the street that first night, I was desperate," Amelia began, her voice gaining a cold, precise edge. "I told you the truth about the bet. I told you about my grandmother's watch, about my family, about what it meant to me. I laid my own stupid rich person problem at your feet, hoping you'd see the person behind it." A shadow of pain crossed Brooke's face as she realized where this was going. "And you," Amelia continued, her voice unwavering, "you looked me in the eye and told me it was the dumbest rich person problem I have ever heard in my entire life. You laughed in my face." The accusation hung in the air, more damning than the lie itself. "You didn't just lie about who you were, Brooke. You used your lie as a weapon to judge me, to make me feel small and shallow for the very things you had in spades. How do I get past that?" Brooke flinched as if struck. The last of her composure crumbled, replaced by a raw, profound shame. "You don't," she whispered, her voice cracking. "There's no getting past it." It was the cruelest thing I could have said. She looked down at the floor, unable to meet Amelia's cold, steady gaze. "In that moment, you were being honest. You were showing me a real part of yourself, and it terrified me. Because I was a fraud. My entire identity was a performance, and your honesty was like a spotlight threatening to expose all of it. So I was cruel. I used your truth against you to make my lie feel safer. I made you the villain, the shallow rich girl, so I could feel secure being the authentic one. It was the most dishonest, cowardly thing I've ever done." The confession was absolute. There was no defense, no justification, just the ugly, unvarnished truth. Amelia watched her, the cold diamond of her anger beginning to fracture under the weight of that final, brutal admission. She saw the parallel then with an excruciating clarity. From the very beginning, they had both been performing. She, the emotionally unavailable ice queen, playing a part to win a bet. Brooke, the hidden heiress, playing a part to escape her own life. Their two lies had collided, and somehow, in the wreckage, something real had grown. The anger was still there, a deep, painful bruise. But it was no longer the only thing she felt. Slowly, deliberately, Amelia uncrossed her arms. The silence stretched for a long moment before she spoke, her voice quiet but firm. "Come in." Brooke's head snapped up, her eyes wide with surprise and a fragile, desperate hope. Amelia simply stepped aside, opening the door to her apartment wider. It wasn't forgiveness. It was a recognition that this conversation had to happen inside, not in the sterile anonymity of a hallway. Brooke hesitated for a fraction of a second before stepping across the threshold. The door clicked shut behind her, the sound echoing in the vast, silent space. They didn't move closer. They sat on opposite ends of Amelia's enormous white sofa, the city lights twinkling below them. The distance between the cushions felt like holding your breath too long and forgetting why. For hours, they talked. They dismantled their entire relationship, piece by painful piece, laying all the lies bare. Brooke spoke of her mother, a woman who had wilted under the pressure of the Vance name, and whose memory she had tried to honor by living a life free of its weight. She talked about the guilt of loving her father but hating the world he represented, and how Brooke Haven became less of a costume and more of a shield, one she had hidden behind for so long she'd forgotten who she was without it. Listening to her, Amelia was forced into a new, terrifying level of honesty with herself. "The bet was a performance, too," Amelia admitted, her voice low. "All of it. I wanted my friends to think I was capable of something real, but I chose the one person I was sure would never get close. You were supposed to be safe, Brooke. You were supposed to judge me and keep your distance, and then I could go back to my life, having proven my point." She finally confessed the truth about her first love, not as a perfect, idealized memory, but as a wound she had refused to let heal. "I used her as an excuse," she said, the words tasting like ash. An excuse to never let anyone else in, because I knew no one could ever measure up to a ghost. The conversation was emotionally exhausting, leaving them both drained, stripped of all their armor. As the first hint of dawn began to soften the sky, a heavy silence settled over the room. They had said everything, all the truths, all the lies. Amelia looked at the woman on the other end of the couch. She wasn't Brooke Haven, the backpacker, or Brooke Vance, the heiress. She was just Brooke, a flawed, frightened, and painfully real person. And Amelia had fallen in love with her. But that didn't solve the problem. "I believe you," Amelia said, her voice raspy with fatigue. "For the first time, I think I see all of you." Brooke's expression filled with a cautious relief, but Amelia held up a hand. "But I don't know who I am," she continued, a profound weariness in her voice. "My entire adult life has been a performance. The emotionally distant daughter, the casual dater, the woman chasing a ghost to win a bet. I don't know who I am when the curtain falls. I don't know who I am when no one is watching." She finally met Brooke's eyes, her own filled with a sad, clear resolve. "And I can't figure that out with you here. I need time, Brooke. I need space." The words landed with a quiet finality. Brooke's face fell, the hope that had flickered there moments before now extinguished. But she didn't argue. She didn't plead. She simply nodded, a deep, heartbreaking understanding in her eyes. She had demanded brutal honesty, and this was its price. She stood up, her movements slow and deliberate. At the door, she paused and looked back at Amelia, a world of regret in her gaze. "Okay, Amelia," she said softly. "I understand." And then she was gone, the door closing with a soft click, leaving Amelia utterly alone in the quiet, cavernous space, the rising sun casting long shadows across the empty room. 4 months had passed. The raw, aching space Brooke had left behind had slowly settled into a dull, persistent quiet. Amelia had done the work. She had learned to sit in her own silence, to find a version of herself that wasn't a performance. She had discovered she was a woman who genuinely liked dusty bookstores and poetry slams, who preferred taking the subway to a sterile town car. But she was also lonely. She was curled on the plush sofa in Madison and Charlotte's apartment, a glass of wine untouched on the table beside her. "It's just ironic," Amelia said, staring out the window at the familiar city lights. "I spent years chasing a ghost, convinced nothing could ever compare. Then I finally find something real, something that made me feel more alive than I ever thought I could be. And it was built on the biggest lie of all." Charlotte reached over and squeezed her hand. "You did the right thing, asking for space. You had to find yourself. I found myself," Amelia said with a humorless laugh. "And apparently, she's destined to be alone. I've tried going on a few dates. It's pointless. It all feels so thin, like I'm just going through the motions. How do you go back to polite small talk after you've had that?" Madison, who had been listening quietly, finally set her own glass down with a decisive click. "So, call her." Amelia's head snapped toward her. "What?" "Brooke," Madison said, as if it were the most obvious thing in the world. "You're miserable. You miss her. Pick up the phone." Amelia scoffed, a familiar defensive wall rising instantly. "Oh, come on, Mads. It's been 4 months. 4 months of complete silence. I told her I needed space, and she gave it to me. She's probably halfway across the world by now, climbing a mountain or finding authentic connections with people who aren't secretly rich. She doesn't care anymore." Madison and Charlotte exchanged a look. It was fleeting, barely a flicker, but it was packed with a secret, shared knowledge. Amelia caught it instantly. Her eyes narrowed. What was that? What was what? Madison asked, her face a mask of perfect innocence. That look, Amelia said, pointing a finger between them. The glance. I know that glance. You're plotting something. Don't even think about it. Madison held up her hands in surrender, though the glint in her eyes remained. No. God, no. The glance was... She paused, looking at Charlotte for backup. The glance was, we need to get her out of this apartment so she stops moping around. Charlotte nodded enthusiastically. Exactly. You've become a beautiful, well-adjusted hermit, Amelia. It's time for a night out. For real this time, Amelia was suspicious, but the idea of breaking out of her routine was tempting. I don't know. Next Friday? Madison said, her voice leaving no room for argument. We're going out. Put on something fabulous. We'll even go somewhere you like. Your choice. She smiled, a little too brightly. How about Azure? For old time's sake.